The 6th chapter of the mystery of the broken mirror is called The Image of the Unseen God. When I was around 22 years of age, I spent some 6 months working as a care assistant in a hostel for homeless men. This marked an important turning point in my own understanding of Christian faith and life. For I'd just left university, having graduated in theology, and I was full to the brim with ideas of what I thought Christianity was all about. One Sunday morning, during a service at the hostel, I remember standing up to read these words from the first letter of St. John. My dear children, let us love one another, since love comes from God. And everyone who loves is born of God and knows God. Anyone who fails to love cannot have known God. After reading the words, I remember looking around the room at the group of shabby-looking men who were sitting there, the majority of whom suffered from mental illness of various kinds. And the thought entered my head. What am I doing? What am I saying? I realized the futility of using words which have no content. What was the point of using the word love when it had little or no meaning for those casualties of life who were hearing it? Most of them had experienced very little love in their lives, with the consequence that they had little feeling of self-worth or self-love. I understood then something which had been puzzling me for weeks, namely why they always assumed I was being paid for what I was doing. In conversation with me, they seemed unable to take in the fact that I was working as a volunteer at the hostel. In their mind, what motive other than financial could a clearly educated young man have for working in a place like that? They thought in this way because love was for them an empty word, and they considered themselves as people without any value to anyone. Over the next few weeks, the penny began to drop. I began to realize that the only way for them to understand love was for love to be shown to them. I was going to have to flesh out love, make it visible and real in my daily actions and dealings with them. Preparing their food, sharing their conversations, listening to their stories. That was all fairly easy, comparatively easy. But cleaning the toilets, taking flea-ridden clothes to the laundrette, or cutting the long, ingrowing toenails of a man who hadn't changed his socks or washed his feet for what smelt like weeks, if not months, was, needless to say, much harder. But for the first time in my life, however, I began to understand the ministry of Jesus and why he spent so much time caring for the outcasts, the lepers, and the cripples, and all the people who felt they were worth nothing to anyone, least of all to God. That concept of incarnation, or taking flesh, became real to me. I saw why it was at the heart of the Christian understanding of Jesus. What I was doing there at that hostel by making love real, visible, and tangible was just a dim reflection of what God was doing in Jesus. And this is what St. John describes in that famous prologue to his gospel that we read at Christmas time. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. The writer uses the expression word, logos in Greek, the word, to mean the self-expression of God's own being. In other words, God in Jesus was making God's own nature and presence visible and tangible. To return once more again to the mirror analogy, Jesus is like a polished mirror in which the image of God is truly and perfectly reflected. St. Paul writes to the early Christian community at Colossae, using words which seem already to have been found in one of the very first Christian hymns, written just a couple of decades after the time of Jesus. He, Christ, is the image of the unseen God and the firstborn of all creation. For in him were created all things in heaven and on earth. Listen carefully to what those early Christian followers were saying as they sought to make sense of their experience of Jesus. That man Jesus, who had lived and worked among them, was not only the perfect image or reflection of God, but also the perfect human being, who was true to the very purpose of the whole of creation, namely, to reflect the image of God. The mirror of creation may indeed be broken and tarnished and cracked, as we have seen, but in Jesus, the mirror is once more crystal clear. Notice, however, what they were not saying about Jesus. The mirror didn't drop from heaven. Jesus was no demigod or heavenly space invader. Of human flesh and blood, born of a human mother, he was as much part of creation as you and me. He was, to quote St. Paul once more, the firstborn of all creation. A foretaste, if you like, of what the whole of humanity and the whole of creation is destined to become. The new mirror, the new creation, has to be an intrinsic part of creation, but restored and recreated to its former glory. The Christian understanding of the person of Jesus becomes a teasing conundrum, insofar as we regard God and creation, divinity and humanity, as separate experiences, a bit like oil and water, which we try in vain to mix together in one jug. Or like two building blocks, which we somehow glue together in one person. Such mental gymnastics actually miss the point. The person of Jesus, the true reflection, the true mirror, the image of the unseen God, and the firstborn of all creation, invites us to review our understanding both of God and of human nature. Our understanding of God has changed because God has been given a human face. In Jesus, God has been found, so to speak, with hands dirty, immersed in the mess of creation. Far from being the remote fatherly figure of childhood imagination, or even the grim, unfeeling chess player who moves the pieces around on the board of popular thinking, but nevertheless remains conveniently aloof from it all. God is seen taking responsibility for the mess which creation has become, and works from within to recreate it. God takes the initiative in restoring the image. The most powerful image of God is that of one who becomes powerless and empty. The crucified man on the cross reveals a God who suffers with and through his people. The broken body of the crucified Christ speaks to us of a God who identifies profoundly, intimately with the broken mirror of creation, who takes responsibility for it and shares the brokenness. What more powerful symbol of divine love can there be than the tortured body of the crucified Christ, the perfect mirror, broken by sinful humanity, and yet still continuing to love and pray for his persecutors. Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing. The broken, suffering man on the cross, who sacrifices his life for the healing of creation, is therefore the true image of God. There's a Jewish proverb which runs, "If God lived on earth, we would all throw stones at his windows." The cross perhaps helps us to understand that facet of human nature. We find it hard to cope with what Jesus represents. When we look in the new mirror of Jesus Christ, we see at once both the true image of God and the true nature of humanity. And it is too much for us to face. Our own failings, our own inadequacy, in short, our own brokenness, is revealed too sharply by contrast. What else could we do than try to break the mirror once again? But the dying and the rising of Jesus Christ shows that the new mirror is unbreakable. The image of God in humanity cannot be destroyed. In this way, Jesus reveals the destiny of humankind and of all creation, for the same miracle can take place in our lives and in the experiences of the whole of God's creation. God's kingdom, God's shalom, God's healing of the brokenness will indeed come. The destiny of the universe and of every human being is to be restored in the image of God. Christ is neither a divine space invader nor a unique human being, but the pioneer, the forerunner, and the foretaste of what will be universally true, the firstborn of all creation. Or as St. Paul says elsewhere in his letter to the church in Corinth, if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. The old has passed away. Behold, the new has come.